Have you ever watched a $2 billion data empire evaporate in under 48 hours? It was not a hacker or an economic meltdown. It collapsed because a man in a $1,000 suit used cheap scissors to cut my employee badge in half. He thought he eliminated an obstacle, but instead severed the only lifeline saving his company from the federal government. Pour a bourbon. This will make you rethink crossing the woman holding your server keys. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you so genuinely for giving us your time today. Recently, YouTube disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us entirely without an operating budget to keep bringing you these narratives. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can hear even better, much longer, and incredibly detailed exclusive true stories that we cannot publicize on YouTube, brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors. You can easily join by simply scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us begin today's story of corporate arrogance and absolute vengeance, as told by our main character, Gianna Anderson. I was 34 years old when I realized that being invisible was my greatest weapon. My name is Gianna Anderson, and I was the senior data security architect at Synapse Point. If you have never heard of Synapse Point, that is exactly by design. We were a massive corporate intelligence data broker headquartered in a towering monument of glass and steel in downtown Chicago. We traded in secrets, market predictions, and the kind of high-level corporate espionage that men in expensive suits politely call competitive analysis. We housed petabytes of confidential information for Fortune 500 companies, government contractors, and international banking conglomerates. People usually picture IT workers as the exhausted folks who reset your email password or tell you to restart your router. I was not that kind of IT. I was the warden of the digital fortress. Around my neck hung something known internally as the core key. It was not a piece of cheap plastic to swipe at the lobby turnstiles. It was a military-grade encrypted physical biometric badge. It contained a microchip that constantly monitored my pulse and required my specific thumbprint to authenticate any major systemic changes. More importantly, this badge was directly hardwired into the global risk insurance network of the company. It flashed a tiny green LED light every 60 seconds, silently communicating with the servers of our insurance underwriters. It was the physical anchor, the literal heartbeat of our entire security compliance. Without it, the insurance algorithms would instantly recognize a critical vulnerability and initiate an automatic lockdown. Despite holding the literal keys to the kingdom, my existence within the company was effectively a ghost story. While the executives drank sparkling water in penthouse boardrooms overlooking Lake Michigan, I worked in a windowless sub-basement. The only sounds in my world were the sterile, relentless hum of server cooling units and the aggressive clatter of my own keyboard. I was paid tens of thousands of dollars below my actual market value. During the rare occasions I was invited upstairs to the daylight floors, my warnings were consistently brushed aside. They looked right through me. Yet, I was the only deadbolt standing between those arrogant executives and catastrophic federal indictments. Then came Preston Vance. Preston was 30 years old, possessing the title of Executive Vice President, a position he earned entirely through the merit of his father being our largest majority shareholder. Preston wore custom-tailored Tom Ford suits that cost more than my monthly rent. He smelled of expensive gin and possessed an ego so massive it generated its own gravitational pull. To Preston, data was just raw money waiting to be printed. He was addicted to the spotlight, frequently featured in flashy tech magazines, and aggressively impatient. To him, my complex security protocols were not a shield. They were, in his exact words, a cash flow obstruction. It did not take long for Preston to begin rapidly consolidating his power across the corporate floor. He wanted data moving faster, sold quicker, and delivered to clients with absolutely zero friction. Friction, in my professional vocabulary, meant security during a quarterly board meeting. I attempted to calmly explain the severe dangers of relaxing our encryption standards for a new batch of clients. Preston stood up at the mahogany table, flashed a blindingly white smile, and openly mocked me in front of the entire executive team. "Gianna is a dinosaur living in fear," he announced, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "She wants to keep our assets locked in a Cold War bunker while our competitors are racing on the Autobahn. We need speed. We need agility. We do not need archaic paranoia slowing down our quarterly revenue." The board, mesmerized by his charisma and terrified of his father's equity, simply laughed. They approved his motion without a second thought. The very next day, Preston bypassed my authority entirely and unilaterally ordered his loyal junior engineers to strip away 3 critical layers of our internal firewalls. He wanted to significantly accelerate the data retrieval speed for our biggest overseas clients. It was a reckless, arrogant maneuver that left our most sensitive informational vaults practically holding the door open for anyone with a basic web scraping algorithm. I did not scream. I did not storm into his pristine glass office and demand respect. In the dark reality of corporate survival, anger is a luxury that only the powerful can afford. Instead, I retreated to my windowless basement and went to work. I quietly logged every single system change his team made. I became a meticulous digital archivist of his incompetence. I created beautifully detailed time-stamped records of the degraded firewalls. I adhered strictly to every single internal compliance procedure, writing and submitting formal risk warning reports directly to his inbox. I knew Preston would never bother to read them. He was too busy giving podcast interviews about his visionary leadership. While he was busy building his fragile glass castle, I was quietly laying the foundation for a fully legal exit protocol for myself. Every ignored email, every bypassed security measure, and every condescending remark was perfectly documented, encrypted, and backed up to an external drive. I knew the storm was coming. I just had to make sure that when the lightning finally struck, I was the only one standing on perfectly insulated ground. The friction reached its breaking point over a proprietary predictive algorithm. It was the crown jewel of our research and development division, a piece of code so aggressively efficient it could forecast global supply chain collapses weeks before they ever materialized. Preston had secretly negotiated a dark back-channel deal to license this exact algorithm to an unvetted foreign investment firm. It was a blatant violation of federal export controls and a direct, catastrophic breach of our insurance underwriting agreements. But Preston did not care about international corporate law. He only saw the massive commission check waiting for him at the finish line. There was just one massive problem standing in his way. The algorithm was heavily encrypted and permanently locked behind my specific security partition. He could not transfer the source code without my direct biometric authorization. To seize absolute control, he needed me gone, but firing a senior data architect without a valid cause would immediately trigger a massive severance payout and, more importantly, an automatic external audit of my network files. Preston was too greedy and too arrogant to let that happen. So, he orchestrated a theater of absolute betrayal. He fabricated a digital trail, using his newly acquired administrative overrides to frame me for a minor, controlled data leak involving low-level client metadata. It was a sloppy, incredibly amateurish frame job, but it was enough to terminate me with extreme prejudice for gross disciplinary violations. The move was designed to completely nullify my severance package and strip away any immediate legal recourse. I felt the sudden shift in the network before I even heard the heavy footsteps outside my door. My terminal abruptly flashed red, violently locking me out of the primary databases. The ambient hum of the server racks seemed to drop an entire octave. Then, the heavy, reinforced steel door of my basement office was shoved open with brutal, unnecessary force. Preston marched into the cramped room, the stale air instantly filled with the suffocating scent of his designer cologne. He was flanked by 2 enormous private security contractors wearing dark tactical vests, their hands resting aggressively on their utility belts. They towered over my small desk, suffocating the already thin oxygen in the windowless room. Preston did not even bother to look me in the eye at first. He slammed a thick termination folder onto my keyboard with a loud, violent smack. His breathing was heavy, fueled by pure adrenaline and malicious triumph. "Get up," Preston commanded, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You are done here. Gianna, you thought you were so incredibly smart hiding down here, didn't you? We caught your little data leak. You are a massive liability, a pathetic incompetent, and you are officially terminated for cause effective this exact second." I remained perfectly still in my ergonomic chair. I looked down at the termination papers, then slowly moved my gaze up to his flushed, arrogant face. I did not say a single word. My total silence only infuriated him more. He leaned over my desk, planting his perfectly manicured hands on the wood, bringing his face mere inches from mine. "I always knew you were dead weight," he hissed, spittle actually flying from his lips. "You have spent years pretending to be some vital genius, but you are nothing but an obsolete, paranoid failure holding this entire company back. Pack your garbage. These gentlemen are going to escort you out of my building right now." Standard corporate protocol dictated that human resources would calmly request my badge and quietly deactivate it at the main terminal upstairs. But Preston was not interested in protocol. He wanted absolute, degrading humiliation. He wanted a physical victory. Before I could even reach up to unclip the lanyard myself, his hand shot forward. He grabbed the thick nylon cord around my neck and yanked it violently downward. The breakaway clasp snapped aggressively against the back of my neck, leaving a stinging, hot red welt. He held the heavy biometric badge up in the harsh fluorescent light, dangling it in the air like a freshly caught hunting trophy. "This piece of trash is worthless now," he sneered, his lips curling into a vicious, triumphant grin. He reached over to my pen cup, grabbing a pair of cheap, dull office scissors. In a deliberate, highly theatrical motion, he positioned the thick plastic of the badge between the steel blades. He squeezed his hand together with all his strength. It took genuine, shaking effort, his knuckles turning pure white, until the heavy reinforced plastic finally gave way. A sharp, sickening crack echoed through the tiny room. The badge fell into two jagged pieces onto my desk. He had cut straight through the dead center. What Preston saw was a symbolic execution of my authority. What I saw was the violently exposed copper wiring and the completely shattered core of the encrypted microchip. That microchip was not just an electronic door key, it was the physical, living tether to Meridian Global. Every single minute, that exact chip sent a highly encrypted ping out to the insurance servers, acting as a constant digital heartbeat, verifying that the structural integrity of Synapse Point was safe and uncompromised. The exact moment those cheap scissors severed the circuit, the heartbeat flatlined. The invisible clock instantly started ticking. 60 seconds remained until the insurance artificial intelligence registered a total systemic hostile failure. The two security guards tensed their shoulders, fully expecting me to scream, to cry, or to launch myself across the desk in a rage. They braced themselves for a hysterical, messy breakdown. Instead, I felt an icy, profound wave of absolute peace wash over my entire body. My heart rate actually slowed down to a resting rhythm. I looked at the broken plastic resting on my desk. Then I looked slowly up at Preston. I smiled. It was not a forced, nervous smile. It was a genuine, warm expression of pure, unadulterated pity. I calmly opened my bottom desk drawer, pulled out a small cardboard box, and began quietly placing my personal items inside. A coffee mug, a physical notebook, a spare gray sweater. My movements were slow, deeply deliberate, and entirely unbothered. The utter lack of panic in my demeanor made the air in the room suddenly feel incredibly cold. Preston's triumphant smirk began to visibly falter, quickly replaced by a microscopic, twitching look of deep confusion. I picked up my box, pushing my chair back smoothly. I walked past the two massive guards who were now looking at each other in highly uneasy silence. I stopped right next to the doorway, standing shoulder to shoulder with Preston. I leaned in slightly, locking my eyes directly onto his. "You just triggered the Frost Covenant," I whispered softly. making sure my voice was perfectly steady. "Good luck with the Department of Defense." I did not wait for his response. I walked straight out of the basement, leaving him standing in the freezing silence of the server room alongside the broken pieces of his own absolute destruction. I walked out of the glass lobby and stepped into the crisp afternoon air of downtown Chicago. I did not look back at the towering monument of corporate greed. My pulse was perfectly steady, my breathing calm. I retrieved my car from the underground garage and merged onto the outbound highway, driving away from the concrete canyon of the financial district. I headed toward a quiet, unassuming suburb. My destination was a dimly lit, authentic jazz lounge that I had frequented for years. It was the kind of place that existed in stark contrast to the sterile tech world. It featured worn leather booths, heavy mahogany tables, and the soothing, completely unstructured melody of a live saxophone spilling warmly into the room. I sat down in a secluded corner booth, ordered a neat glass of 12-year-aged bourbon, and calmly opened my personal laptop. I was not there to work. I was there to watch a magnificent, silent demolition. While I took my first measured sip of the warm, amber liquid, a highly sophisticated sequence of events was already unfolding miles away, dictated by the flawless logic of the machines. Exactly 60 seconds after Preston Vance crushed the biometric microchip in my basement office, a massive server cluster located in London, owned by the underwriters at Meridian Global, paused. The insurance mainframe was patiently waiting for the familiar, encrypted ping from my core key. It waited 1 second. It waited 2 seconds. It waited 3 seconds. The absolute silence on the network was deafening to the machine. According to the strict, uncompromising parameters I had legally coded into the master service agreement years ago, an unverified disconnection of the chief architect biometric key was never treated as a simple hardware malfunction. It was treated as a severe critical security breach. The artificial intelligence at Meridian Global did not pause to ask questions. It instantly classified the dead signal as a hostile takeover event. In a fraction of a millisecond, completely devoid of human intervention or corporate politics, the artificial intelligence executed its absolute directive. It completely and permanently suspended the $500 million cybersecurity insurance policy backing Synapse Point. Back at the corporate headquarters, Preston was undoubtedly celebrating his perceived victory. My laptop screen displayed a secure, read-only external monitoring dashboard that visualized our internal network traffic logs. I could track his exact movements through the system. He was sitting at his massive desk on the top floor, probably holding a crystal glass of celebratory champagne, ready to package and steal the proprietary algorithm. The logs showed his executive credentials accessing the master vault. He clicked the primary file. He fully expected the code to compile smoothly, ready to be shipped across the ocean to his unvetted foreign buyers. Instead, his monitor would have flashed a sterile, unforgiving shade of gray. The moment the insurance policy evaporated, the Frost Covenant was initiated. Without the active insurance policy acting as a digital guarantor of safety, the entire server architecture recognized that the company was suddenly operating entirely outside of legal and financial compliance. The predictive algorithm he so desperately wanted instantly executed a self-preservation protocol. It aggressively encrypted itself into a deep freeze, wrapping the millions of lines of source code in an unbreakable cryptographic shell. It was mathematically impossible to bypass without the physical biometric badge he had just destroyed with his own hands. But the deep freeze of one algorithm was merely the first domino to fall in a massive chain reaction. On my laptop screen, a global map of active data connections began to light up in brilliant, violent shades of red. Synapse Point was a corporate intelligence broker. Our entire existence and daily revenue relied on constantly feeding live data streams to major financial institutions worldwide. The precise moment the insurance policy was terminated, our corporate SSL certificates were immediately invalidated. You cannot legally or securely transmit highly sensitive financial data without a valid, insured security certificate. Every single application programming interface connecting us to the global banking sector slammed shut simultaneously. Wall Street banks, international hedge funds, and private equity partners across 3 different continents were violently disconnected from our servers. It was as if a massive, invisible axe had severed the main transatlantic fiber optic cables. Revenue stopped flowing instantly. The arrogant celebration in the executive suite ended in a fraction of a heartbeat. I watched the critical error logs multiply by the thousands per second. Preston was bleeding company revenue by the tens of millions with every passing minute. I could easily picture the cold sweat breaking out on his forehead, ruining his perfectly tailored appearance, his hands shaking over his keyboard. Pure, unadulterated panic set in. The network logs showed a frantic, chaotic surge of administrative commands originating from his terminal. He had authorized his junior IT team to forcefully bypass the lockdown. He was ordering them to launch a cyber attack against their own infrastructure, desperately trying to crack the frozen algorithm and manually force the broken data pipelines back open. It was a pathetic, wildly desperate display of complete incompetence. Every single brute force attempt, every backdoor exploit they tried to wedge into the firewall, was met with a ruthless, automated denial of access. The security system I had meticulously designed did not negotiate. It did not care about his executive title, his custom suits, or his father holding majority shares. It only recognized the catastrophic absence of the core key. I leaned back against the heavy leather of the booth. The smooth jazz washed over the gentle clinking of glasses around me. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon and watched the red error notifications flood my screen like a beautiful digital sunset. The glass empire was tearing itself apart from the inside out, and the invisible architect was simply sitting in the shadows, enjoying the music. The structural collapse of a digital empire does not happen in slow motion. Once the foundation shatters, the entire building comes down in a violent, uncontrollable freefall. What Preston Vance failed to understand about the algorithm he so desperately wanted to sell was that it was not merely predicting commercial shipping delays for consumer electronics. That specific piece of predictive architecture was deeply entangled with a highly classified subcontract for the United States Department of Defense. It was analyzing and forecasting the global supply chain vulnerabilities of rare earth metals used in the manufacturing of advanced missile guidance systems. By attempting to secretly transfer that exact proprietary code to an unvetted foreign entity, Preston was not just breaking a corporate non-disclosure agreement, he was actively committing federal economic espionage. Because of the extreme sensitivity of that military data, I had legally embedded a specific automated safeguard deep within the core architecture long before Preston ever took power. It was called a distress beacon. The logic was ruthlessly simple. If the military-grade encryption ever sensed that the active insurance policy was terminated, it meant the fortress walls had fallen. The system would instantly assume the server was under a catastrophic foreign attack. The beacon did not send a warning to our IT department. It bypassed the corporate hierarchy entirely and fired a highly encrypted, automatic distress signal directly to the cybersecurity auditing divisions of the federal government. Exactly 24 hours after I packed my small cardboard box and walked out of that basement, the real-world consequences slammed into the glass facade of Synapse Point. At 9 o'clock the next morning, a fleet of black, unmarked government vehicles abruptly blocked the main entrance of the downtown headquarters. Federal agents wearing tactical windbreakers emblazoned with the insignias of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission swarmed the pristine marble lobby. They completely bypassed the terrified front desk receptionists, flashing federal badges and demanding immediate, unrestricted access to the executive floors. They carried heavy, legally binding subpoenas demanding a full explanation for a critical, unauthorized data transfer of classified national security assets. This was the exact moment Preston realized the beautiful, inescapable trap he had built for himself. To fire me without paying my severance, Preston had deliberately fabricated a digital trail. He had officially logged a formal disciplinary report claiming that I had caused a data leak. He signed his own name to that document as the discovering executive. He thought he was being incredibly clever, tying up a human resources loophole. But in the eyes of the ruthless federal investigators currently locking down the building, the timeline painted a terrifying picture of domestic cyber terrorism. The government auditors looked at the raw data. They saw that an executive had officially documented a data breach. Less than an hour later, the top-tier cybersecurity architect was forcibly removed from the premises. Immediately after her physical departure, the biometric security failed. The insurance policy was violently revoked, and a massive chunk of military supply chain data went into absolute lockdown to protect itself from an internal extraction attempt. The federal agents did not see a petty corporate power struggle. They saw an organized, inside job orchestrated by the executive vice president to cripple the defense network and sell state secrets. Preston had officially documented his own fake data leak, and that exact lie was now the primary evidence the government was using to build a treason case against him. Absolute, unadulterated panic erupted on the top floor. The executive boardroom, usually a sanctuary of calm arrogance and expensive bottled water, turned into a chaotic war zone. The entire board of directors was frantically summoned for an emergency crisis meeting. Men and women who had laughed at me just weeks prior were now sweating through their tailored suits, screaming at each other over the massive mahogany table. The stock price was already bleeding out, but the immediate threat of federal indictments made the financial losses look like a minor inconvenience. The chief legal counsel, a ruthless veteran corporate lawyer who cared only about keeping the board members out of prison, demanded the raw internal server logs. He ordered the remaining IT staff to bypass Preston and pull every single piece of correspondence related to the security architecture. When the legal team opened the archives, they did not find a paranoid, obsolete employee. They found a flawless, meticulously documented trail of absolute compliance. They found the time-stamped records of Preston unilaterally ordering his engineers to disable 3 layers of critical firewalls. They found every single automated risk assessment report I had submitted directly to his inbox, clearly warning him that altering the encryption would violate the Department of Defense contract. They found the digital receipts proving that Preston had not even bothered to open those emails before deleting them. The general counsel slammed the thick stack of printed logs onto the table right in front of Preston, his face purple with absolute rage. Realizing that the Golden Boy executive had single-handedly handed the federal government a perfect, open-and-shut criminal case, the realization finally crashed over Preston like a physical weight. The color completely drained from his perfectly tanned face. His breathing turned erratic, shallow, and desperate. He was no longer looking at losing his bonus, or even bankrupting his father's company. He was staring directly down the barrel of a 10 to 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for corporate espionage and the reckless endangerment of national security data. The room was spinning around him. The executives were screaming. The legal team was scrambling to draft desperate holding statements for the press, and federal agents were physically standing outside the frosted glass of the boardroom doors, in a state of pure, blinding terror. Preston pulled his expensive smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He scrolled frantically through his contacts, desperate to find the one person who could reverse the deep freeze, the one person who understood the architecture well enough to prove to the government that the data had not actually left the building. He dialed my number. He pressed the phone to his ear, his eyes wide with desperate hope, praying that I would answer. Instead, he was met with a single, sterile automated tone, followed by absolute silence. I had blocked his number the exact second I walked out of the building. By the third day, Synapse Point was completely paralyzed. The corporate headquarters had transformed from a bustling fortress of commerce into a silent, heavily monitored crime scene. In early trading, the company stock had evaporated by a staggering 40%, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value in a matter of hours. The trading floor was in absolute chaos. Clients were aggressively pulling their contracts, and the IT department had officially given up. The general counsel, a man who usually commanded a room with ruthless arrogance, was now reduced to using his personal, untraceable cell phone to call my retained legal counsel. He practically begged for a brief, 10-minute conversation to find a resolution. I was not sitting in a dark room anxiously waiting for their call. I was leisurely strolling through a contemporary art exhibition on the north side of the city, admiring a stark, beautifully lit minimalist sculpture. The quiet, serene atmosphere of the gallery was the perfect contrast to the burning empire across town. My lawyer answered the panicked call and calmly dictated my uncompromising terms. I would not accept a standard phone call, and I would certainly not return to the building. I would only speak through a highly encrypted, fully recorded video channel. I demanded the immediate attendance of the entire board of directors, the general counsel, and most importantly, a senior underwriting representative from Meridian Global. If a single person was missing from that screen, there would be no negotiation. They assembled the required parties in less than 20 minutes. I sat down on a velvet bench in a private viewing room, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure bridge. The video grid populated with the faces of the most powerful, untouchable people in the city. They looked exhausted, terrified, and utterly defeated. Preston Vance was seated at the far end of the massive mahogany table, his designer suit heavily wrinkled, his hair unkempt, chewing violently on his thumbnail. He looked exactly like a cornered animal. Before the general counsel could even attempt to open the floor with empty corporate diplomacy, the representative from the insurance company unmuted his microphone. His voice was incredibly cold, completely devoid of human empathy, representing the pure, uncompromising logic of the machine. "Let me make our position absolutely clear," the insurance representative stated flatly to the board. "Our artificial intelligence has registered a critical, catastrophic structural failure within your architecture. Your $500 million policy remains entirely suspended. That policy will only be restored under one specific, non-negotiable condition. The legally designated chief architect must physically authenticate the network utilizing her specific biometric signature and verbally declare the server environment secure. You cannot fire her to bypass this. You cannot hire an external team to override this. Until Miss Anderson personally clears the system, your company remains entirely uninsurable and locked out of the global financial sector." A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the boardroom. The executives turned their desperate eyes toward my feed, realizing that I was holding the absolute power of life and death over their wealth. I leaned slightly toward my webcam, maintaining a calm, piercing gaze. This was never a simple hardware malfunction. I told them, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. I know exactly what Preston was doing. I watched the remaining color completely drain from Preston's face as I dropped the hammer. I calmly detailed his entire secret plan to sell the proprietary algorithm to an unvetted foreign entity. I explained that his administrative overrides were never truly hidden from me. Every single keystroke he made, every shady directory access, every pathetic attempt to bypass the Department of Defense security protocols had been meticulously logged by my shadow architecture. I revealed that all of his digital fingerprints had been perfectly packaged into an encrypted, undeletable incident report. That report was currently resting quietly on an external server, waiting for a single command from my keyboard to be forwarded directly to the federal prosecutors waiting in their lobby. "I am the only person on Earth who can turn your servers back on," I continued, letting the weight of my words crush the room. "But I will not press the restore button unless my extreme, non-negotiable conditions are met within exactly 30 minutes. Preston finally snapped. The sheer terror of his impending reality broke his mind. He slammed his fists violently onto the table, standing up and screaming directly into the microphone. "She is bluffing," he roared, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She is a terrorist. This is corporate extortion. You cannot listen to this pathetic, irrelevant basement dweller. Call the police and have her arrested right now." He kept screaming, but nobody moved. The security guards did not step forward. The general counsel did not reach for his phone. The entire board of directors slowly turned their heads to look at Preston. They did not look at him with sympathy or anger. They looked at him as if he were already a rotting corpse. In the ruthless calculus of corporate survival, Preston was no longer the golden boy or the son of a major shareholder. He was a massive, bleeding liability that needed to be immediately amputated to save the host. The chairman of the board, an elderly billionaire who had known Preston's family for decades, did not even raise his voice. "Shut your mouth and sit down, Preston," he ordered, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. Preston froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden, brutal betrayal of his own peers. He collapsed back into his leather chair, trembling violently. The chairman slowly turned his attention back to the camera, looking directly into my eyes with a deeply humiliating sense of complete submission. The predator had officially become the prey. "We are listening, Gianna," the chairman said, his voice quiet and defeated. "What do you want?" "I am going to make this incredibly simple," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the boardroom like a scalpel. "First, you will immediately wire $10 million into my primary holding account as a non-refundable incident recovery consulting fee. Second, the General Counsel will instantly draft and send me a legally binding document granting me absolute, unconditional immunity from any future civil, criminal, or corporate litigation regarding this event." I paused, letting my eyes lock directly onto the miserable, sweating face of the man who had tried to destroy me. "And finally," I continued, "Preston Vance will physically sign a full written confession acknowledging his direct intentional sabotage of corporate property and his unauthorized attempt to bypass federal security protocols. Following that signature, he will voluntarily resign from Synapse Point, effective immediately, forfeiting every single cent of his severance package and all of his vested stock options." The boardroom erupted into hushed, panicked whispers. Preston violently shook his head, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "I will not sign that," Preston stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "That is a legal death sentence. You are trying to ruin my entire life." "You ruined your own life, Preston," I replied coldly, "and you have exactly 5 minutes to sign it before the United States Department of Defense completely and permanently freezes every single financial asset Synapse Point possesses. The clock is ticking." The General Counsel did not waste a single second. He pulled his heavy laptop toward him, his fingers flying furiously across the keyboard as he drafted the immediate resignation and the confession of sabotage. The chairman of the board leaned over the table, staring at Preston with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are going to sign whatever she puts in front of you," the chairman hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You arrogant, stupid boy. You will sign it, or I will personally walk out to that lobby and hand you over to the federal agents myself." A portable printer in the corner of the boardroom whirred to life. The General Counsel snatched the warm papers from the tray and slammed them down directly in front of Preston. He threw a heavy metallic pen on top of the documents. "Sign it," the General Counsel ordered. Preston looked at the papers, then looked at the cold, unforgiving faces of the executives surrounding him. He was completely isolated. The immense pride and suffocating arrogance that had defined his entire existence completely shattered. His shoulders collapsed. Actual tears began to well up in his eyes, spilling over his eyelashes and streaming down his flushed cheeks. His hands were shaking so violently that he could barely grip the pen. Between pathetic, audible sobs, Preston Vance signed his name. He signed away his brilliant career, his massive fortune, and every last shred of his dignity. 3 minutes later, a highly encrypted notification pinged brightly on my laptop screen. The $10 million consulting fee had successfully cleared into my secure account. A second later, a high-resolution scanned copy of Preston's signed confession and immediate resignation arrived safely in my inbox. "The funds are verified," I stated calmly. "The documents are secured." I reached into my designer leather purse and pulled out a small, heavy rectangular device. It was the master backup key. It was a perfectly legal, fully authorized failsafe required by our original government contracts. a protocol that Preston would have known about if he had ever bothered to read the security architecture manuals. I pressed my right thumb firmly against the glowing biometric scanner on the device. A small blue light blinked rapidly. I leaned slightly closer to my laptop microphone. Identify. The automated security prompt requested through the speakers. Gianna Anderson, Chief Data Security Architect. I spoke clearly and confidently. Protocol Alpha. Override and restore global systems. The response was instantaneous. On my monitoring dashboard, the chaotic sea of red error messages froze. A brilliant, soothing wave of green cascaded across the global network map. The frozen predictive algorithm seamlessly unlocked itself. The corporate SSL certificates immediately renewed. In London, the Meridian Global Artificial Intelligence registered the authorized biometric signature and instantly reinstated the $500 million insurance policy. The massive digital heart of Synapse Point began to beat again, pulling the company back from the absolute brink of total destruction with less than 40 seconds to spare. The boardroom let out a collective, massive sigh of relief. The chairman wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned forward to speak. Gianna, we need to discuss your return to the office, he began, trying to muster a tone of professional authority. I did not let him finish his sentence. I simply reached forward and closed my laptop shut, instantly cutting the video feed and plunging their boardroom back into silence. I did not owe them a single word of goodbye. I packed my bag, walked out of the quiet, serene private viewing room of the art gallery, and pushed through the glass doors. I stepped out onto the bustling pavement, entirely bathed in the bright, beautiful Chicago sunlight. Exactly 1 week later, I officially filed the corporate paperwork to launch my own highly exclusive cybersecurity consulting firm. My initial roster of clients consisted entirely of the elite financial institutions and government contractors who had aggressively terminated their relationships with Synapse Point during the blackout. They did not want to do business with the landlords of a broken glass castle. They wanted to do business with the architect who held the keys. They always say that the people you ignore are the ones who can hurt you the most. But the truth is much simpler. Never hand a pair of scissors to a fool, and never, ever underestimate the catastrophic power of an invisible woman holding the server keys. Thank you so genuinely for giving us your time and listening to this story today. We would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from right now, so please let us know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed today's narrative and want to help support our completely demonetized channel, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you can listen to our absolute best, highly detailed, and completely exclusive true stories that are far too intense to publicize here on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you once again for your incredible support, and we will see you in the next story.